May 13th, 2019 meeting of the Local Officers Compensation Commission is called to order. I will call the roll. Commissioner Harwood, Commissioner Hewitt,
Here.
Commissioner Harand,
Here.
Commissioner Pressel,
Here.
Commissioner Weinert.
Here.
We have 4, which is a quorum. First item of business is the election of a chair for this session. Any volunteers?
I'm looking down at that end of the table because it sounds like we've both done our term of service.
Is renewal possible for you?
I would prefer not to this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
I nominate you.
Well, that's funny, because I was gonna,
Oh, convenient.
I guess I'd be happy to do so, sure.
Thank you.
I have a second.
Court.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It's passed. Commissioner
Okay.
Weinert is the chair.
Careful what you wish for.
You have the agenda in this binder. Tab 1, first item is approval of the agenda. If you have any questions, I will try to answer them. You can also amend it any time if it becomes necessary.
Do you have to make a motion to approve the agenda? I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Support.
Am I taking over at this point? All right. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of approving the agenda as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On to public comment. We allow up to 3 minutes per speaker. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address this body? Seeing,
Take it we received no emails.
No.
okay, thank you. Seeing no one, we'll call the public comment period closed. On to approval of minutes. This would be the minutes of our October 11th, 2017 meeting. And it's at one of the tabs? here?
Tab 2.
Tab 2?
Do we need to make sure we're near these mics so that they can hear and see?
They pick up pretty well.
Pick
As
up
long
pretty
as
well.
the green circle is green and not
Okay.
red, you should be good.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Someone willing to move approval of the minutes as presented, October 11th, 2017?
I'll move to approve.
Sean, thank you. Support?
I have to abstain on this because I wasn't present at the meeting, so.
So let me just say that I wasn't able to access some of this on Legistar until now, so that's why I'm
Oh,
taking
that's
an
fine.
additional minute.
So take a minute to look through it, yep.
I'm good, thank you.
You're good, okay. A motion and support. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the minutes as presented for Wednesday, October 11th, 2017, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And one abstention.
One abstention.
Thank you. Minutes are approved. On to commission business. We have a resolution to determine salaries of the mayor and city council members as part of this 2019 session.
I'm sorry.
Christopher, do you want to kind of walk us through what we have here?
Just for a second. This is based on our last, the one that was done last time, where it was an average of the CPI change and the non-union compensation change. Last time we did it for, would have been 2016 and 2017. 2017, we only had information through August as of that year, so we cut it off there. This time, we only have information through April, and we do not have the non-union compensation for this year, because that typically would come after the budget is approved. So I've set it up as just for the, basically the 2018 year CPI and non-union compensation change. I looked at the CPI data through April. It looks like it's averaging about 1.7% compared to the 1.9 for the year before, so it's not going to make that much of a difference. I do not know what the non-union compensation change will be, if any.
So is there a tab we should be looking at right now?
Yep, so 3 is the resolution. If you go to tab 5, that is the Bureau of Labor Statistics telling you that it was 1.9% year over year, ending December 2018. And then if you go to tab 6, you will see the union and non-union compensation changes. If you look at the far right-hand side, 2018, you see 3% at the bottom for non-union, and for 2019, TBD. And that was what was used last time.
You know, I'm struggling with something here, which is that, and maybe this is the time to say this was when I was overlooking the minutes, but it was my understanding that our resolution wasn't just to set the next couple of years of salary, but it was actually a certain default procedure. Do I remember that correctly? Where this was going to be for the future, the standard unless.
I will
something
look
said
back. I
otherwise.
believe there, I know there was, I recollect that there was discussion that it was going to be a good idea to have that default procedure. I don't know if it was set in a resolution
Yeah,
language.
if you don't mind, it's because it may very well be that that's a defect in our minutes then, and once again, I am retrospectively identifying something that I didn't on a timely basis, but that is something that I remember us discussing, and
Yes.
I want to be sure about that, because if the council is always going to be the last word on the subject, and they can say no just as easily as they can say yes, and as we know in past history, they've often done so. However, if what we have is a consistent standing resolution that by default, this is going to be the number, we probably need to be reminded of it.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking back, it may have been that we discussed that, and the body can't bind the future body's hands that way, so it may be, it was just that we're going to set this precedent sort of and continue to do it
That's
kind of as a
entirely
default.
possible.
I think that's what was discussed at the last
Okay.
session.
It does seem logical,
It does.
that you can't set a default going
Right.
forward and bind future.
And nor do I particularly want to, just because, just by way of saying something that I have been thinking about, and this has been a theme with us actually since I first sat on this board in 2015, is that there is a significant disparity between what the mayor gets paid and what the council members get paid. And especially now that I have started to see up more closely how much work council members pour into what they do. I definitely would want to be able to address increasing their compensation without regard to, what these numbers or that numbers suggest, because as these percentages increase, the disparity between the mayor's compensation and the city council members' compensation, it may be perfectly fine, but it does increase.
If memory serves, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there was some intention in the last couple of years about being mindful of the number of meetings required of city council, like on commissions and other task forces and things. And I don't know if that was just an ebb and flow of different sort of years that require more attention, or if there was trying to be a bit more specific on the amount of time the job requires, and then the over and above of, making sure you're having regular contact as your constituents need it.
I have some
Any
thoughts about that.
Yeah, would you please?
So the first time I sat on this board was in 2015, and that was when we met like at the very tail end of the year, and so we were really in a corner on that one. And many of us were new, and we had really no idea what relationship the compensation of city council members bore to the amount of effort that they put into it. And your predecessor, Mary Fales, had assembled a significant amount of information about what other cities do, how much they pay and all this stuff, and it wasn't, I think maybe some people found it helpful. I found it not helpful because I don't know what they do, and it kind of doesn't matter anyhow. But we actually asked Mary to contact the city council members and, you know, have them give us some feedback about what it is that they do. And that was done in haste and responded to not in haste, and some people didn't respond at all, and some people were responded verbally, some people responded in writing. But the overall impression was, number one, varies from council member to council member, and two, they pay no attention to this anyhow because they're not doing it for the money, for which we should all be profoundly grateful. But we were all recognizing that even if you added another $5,000 a year to their salary, that might not be the tipping point for somebody else to decide, yo, I want to be on this and do this job. We were also cognizant of the fact that for the relatively meager amount that they get paid for what they do, you know, probably they have other financial resources. So we were conscious of that, while not really having a very clear idea of how much time each individual council member spent. But certainly, I think, I've concluded they spend a lot of time. Because council meetings themselves are, I think they average 5 hours, maybe shorter.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite that bad yet, but yeah, 11 or
Seven-
midnight.
7 to 2?
11 or midnight, yeah, it might be about that.
Yeah. And there's the prep time that goes into that. Several of them have coffee hours during which they're available to their constituents and other people as well. They've recently started up the caucus, which is different, I think, from what the caucus used to be like, but for 2 hours every Sunday night before a city council meeting, 5 of them are there to talk about anything that's on the agenda with a significant number of people who show up for it, including myself. It is absolutely the most useful way of getting information. And that doesn't count all the time that they spend on other commissions, and each one of them is, I think, 3 or 4 other commissions for which they have to prepare. It's a staggering amount of work. So I've really been thinking about the fact that I would like to see them get paid more, and in a year where it seems like everybody's wish list can conceivably be met, at least before the economy goes downhill again. I'd kind of like for us to consider raising their pay, even if in the end they say thank you, but no thank you.
Do you mind a point of clarity? If we put forward a proposal for mayor and council compensation that gets rejected, is that just it for the year? There is zero increase for that year?
No
So it's
change
not-
for the next 2 years.
For the next 2 years, so we don't get a do-over if we come in too high and the council says, no, this is, we can't accept this. We would have lost the opportunity for 2 years.
Yeah.
I wish that wasn't so, because I appreciate what you're saying, but I also realize that at some point you would cross a line where politically it becomes difficult for them to support, you know, a pay increase for themselves.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess what I'm also saying, though, is that I would, upon reviewing the figures, I would like for our recommendations for city council to, I mean, we could probably say this, but not if this, then that, and maybe we could throw it that way, but I would kind of like to see the increases not necessarily be in lockstep with the mayor's, because I think he's well paid, and I would think he would probably agree. The council members do just a phenomenal amount of work, and they don't get paid as well.
Are those 2 numbers voted on as a whole? Like, does city council vote up,
The
down,
det-
the whole thing?
Yeah, the
So then-
determination is whatever it is that you all decide, and then they up or down.
So they can't up or down council pay and mayor as separate things, it's one?
I do not believe so. I mean,
Okay.
I can look at it, but
That's good
I
to
don't
know.
believe it's structured
I
that
don't-
way.
I could be wrong. I think they vote on the mayor separately from city council, but I'm not positive about that. But it is an up or down vote. You either accept what we recommend or it stays where it is.
And please understand, I'm also saying that, you know, I'm not saying we shouldn't give the mayor an increase. I'm saying that I think that the increase for city council members could be on a different calculation.
I understand that.
But I also think that, I mean, I don't want to see people lock themselves into an up or down vote on everything. And so it's possible that we could come up with a resolution that says, you know, how's this for size, and if you don't like this, what about that?
I don't believe, correct me, but I don't believe we have that option under the state law. I
Yeah,
believe under the law is, we put forth a recommendation, it is voted up and down, up or down by city council. There's no pick A, B, or C, or go back and try again, under state law. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so
Yeah,
I'll
it's-
defer here, but that was has been my understanding.
the way it's written is, it's in terms of a determination, one determination, and then, now council doesn't have to do anything on it. If they do nothing, it becomes effective. But if they introduce a resolution to reject, then there would be a vote on that. And that's what happened last year. The resolution was introduced and the resolution to reject failed.
Yeah.
So therefore, that went into effect.
I mean, I agree with you in that I would like the ability to serve as a council member to not be financially prohibitive to those who don't have resources. The question of whether or not that has made people decide to run or not run, I don't have an answer to. It'd be an interesting question to ask. But I think that would just be legwork on us in the community to ask that. But I do want to recognize that the work is important and takes time, and it is hard to hold down a full-time job and do it, so.
Yeah, to, I guess, expand on that, yeah, I would agree that, the amount of work that's involved in this with the pay compensation essentially limits to a very small pool of people who can be council people. But someone with a demanding full-time job and/or family, you know, just isn't gonna have that kind of time. And I look at the city council, and I'm just comparing some of the numbers, and we're certainly on the low end here, and you mentioned the
What tab
mayor.
are you on, Roger, just so we can?
I'm on tab 7 here. There's city council from both around Michigan and several other around the country. And then mayor, and actually the mayor's even farther out of whack if you look at some of our comparables here.
Sorry to interrupt. I am being told to have folks speak into the microphones a little bit more closer.
Can we do that at city council meetings too?
For those watching at home, yes.
Is that what that talks about? That's fun.
So, the question again becomes, how much do you increase to attract a larger pool on the one hand, and on the other hand, at what point does city council say, no, this is politically undesirable for us to approve it? And I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think we have answers to either one of those questions.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily up to us to find the sweet spot that they can, in good conscience, approve. You know, I think we could probably do the modest increase thing, but I'm just concerned that the modest increase, we continue to I don't want to say undervalue exactly, but it doesn't represent a fair assessment of the amount of effort that it takes. And again, I don't know what the tipping point would be for somebody else. Another $3,000, another $5,000. By the time the IRS takes its cut, it's $3,500. It's, I don't want to say it's chump change, but it's not.
So I just did a quick living wage, and living wage for Washtenaw County, now obviously Ann Arbor is different, but Washtenaw County for 20 hours a week is $13,200. So that's 20 hours. I think we're talking, this probably takes-ish that, but Ann Arbor's gotta be higher than that, because that's all of Washtenaw County, so.
Well, let me throw something out just strictly as a talking point, and this is strictly, I'm not even necessarily proposing this, just so if simply start. What if we looked at, say, a $2,500 a year increase for each of the 2 years where it would be in effect, and maybe do the same or a little more for the mayor, or, you know, in that vicinity? And I would say, I'm just throwing something out so we have something to start talking about.
So you're saying like lumps, or solid number as opposed to percentage?
Yes.
Why?
Because I think if you look at percentage, the only thing you can base percentage on is some sort of consumer price index or union. And so you're inevitably tied to a pretty low number when you're talking about $16,000 a year. That if you start to talk about a percentage amount, you know, even a 10% raise is only, what, $1,600? Which I don't think really tips anything very far. So that's why I sort of wanted to get away from percentages, because, oh, you're giving a 10% raise, that's outrageous. You're giving them $1,600, and so, well, geez, that's not much.
It does address the concern that I have that as we deal with it, percentages, the gap increases ever so
Correct.
marginally, but still.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. If the mayor's making roughly 3 times of what city council is, his raise is gonna be about 3 times as much. Now, whether it should or shouldn't, that's another whole nother discussion, but yes, it looks, when you do percentages, it looks like he's getting a big raise and and council isn't.
Well, is the idea that that would sort of still help bring it up to be more comparable, and then you could conceivably do percentages at another time, or just?
Yeah, although I think, you know, given the, not, particularly the local economy, there's so much variation. It's hard to say that, oh, this is a fair amount and we'll just keep CPI, because things change dramatically. If you know, you just have to look around our city, that the average income in our city is going up considerably faster than the consumer price index. So if you get tied to a consumer price index, you're inevitably gonna be behind, given the economic growth in the area and the attractiveness of the city.
I would add too that some of the discussion about the budget of late has been a recognition that although we do need to remind ourselves that, you know, the fat years don't last and the lean years come around again. And so we do need to hold on to some of our pennies so that we can face lean years in the future. That right now, we are well set. And it does seem to me that if we don't address what I consider to be an income disparity here now, when we can, we certainly won't be able to in future years. And I do like what you're proposing because it doesn't tie it to a percent.
Yeah. And, you know, as we know, as you say, lean years are gonna come, and then it looks, you know, it's impossible to do something like that, because it looks like you're, you know,
Right.
being unfair to the rest of the city workforce.
Right, and that was indeed the history for close to 10 years, I think.
Oh, yeah.
It voted down one increase after another.
Yes.
They don't receive any other benefits, healthcare, insurance, anything like that, correct?
No, there was some discussion recently of creating, or budgeting some funds for miscellaneous expenses, office supplies, papers, and things like that, but I think it was a matter of a few $100s per council member.
Got
But
it.
that was for reimbursement of expenses.
My understanding is elected officials are prohibited from getting benefits
In Michigan?
in Michigan,
Okay,
under
got it.
state law in Michigan.
And that actually is almost more of an inhibiting factor than
Right.
the salary, right? Because it guarantees that you have to be able to get your coverage through employment or through some retirement plan or through a spouse.
I
Yeah.
see.
Again, significantly limits
Right.
the
Yeah.
pool of available
Well, because that's what I was
candidates.
looking at, like, if you look at the chart comparative of, you know, across city councils throughout the country, you know, we're on par with Westland, which has a significantly smaller population. But, you know, in terms of budgets and availability, that sort of thing. But I was struck by the fact that there are, you know, Tempe, Arizona, insurance availability, that kind of thing was a benefit provided, and it was still part-time. So if you think about it in terms of that extra cost of, you know, it's not being provided, so if you are doing retired, you're also paying for healthcare. It's a fact.
Yeah.
I appreciate what's being said, but as I look at the data, and this may be a little bit dated, with a few exceptions, including, you know, full-time councils and a few out-of-state, larger communities, we're pretty close to, I'd say, an average on compensation, and I do appreciate what's being said here, and if I had my druthers, I would be more than happy to, if I was paying it out of my own pocketbook, I'd be more than happy to step up and say, yes, these people deserve this. I guess I'm looking at it more practically in terms of, kind of what the data is showing relative to other communities, and what council member would reasonably allow to move forward to increase compensation. That leads me to kind of back where we started with a more incremental percentage approach. The only variation on the theme that I'd be willing to talk about a bit more would be to do it as you've suggested on choose an appropriate dollar increase for both, so that from a relative perspective, council would be getting a little closer to the mayor and kind of that base compensation. That makes some sense to me. But if we did that, I would like to do it based on, something other than just picking a number, $2,500, and saying, yeah, that seems like a good number, let's increase it by $2,500. And I don't know, does anyone have a sense of what could be a reasonable standard by which to select a dollar amount as opposed to a percentage? Percentages are nice because it's linked to an index of some
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah. One thing I wish we had on the state and city council is what Grand Rapids is. If you look at most of the Michigan ones, most of them are suburban communities.
Yes.
There are very few that have an urban core. Grand Rapids certainly, although much larger, is certainly a more comparable type of city than, say, Farmington Hills would be, or Southfield.
Right.
We can try to get that for next time. if you
Yeah,
want.
and if you look at, for instance, Lansing, which would be somewhat comparable, they're at 25,000. So, and, some of the out-of-state have insurance packages with them, so they're
Right.
Right.
they're not comparable. So it's a little hard to find what I would view as a really good comparable. Kalamazoo possibly, certainly Lansing, Grand Rapids, I would think would be perhaps the best comparable.
That's a very good point.
Well, I think with that, if we're looking, and you're right, like going forward, this 2-year window, would it be reasonable in terms of I realize it'd be work, and so I don't want to create work if it's not going to be useful, but trying to get a sense of what is that time commitment and work of city council in terms of, like, what's the average number of meetings they're attending, that's on here. And obviously people can change that depending on who they are, like how many coffee hours they have and how much they're emailing with constituents. But I wonder if it's something we can talk about, like getting a better sense of what the work is for 2 years from now, so we have that information to help inform this commission in the future.
I think actually it's a good way of, if we found out average hours per week, for instance, then you could say, well, this job is worth so many dollars per hour, and you're putting this in, and you at least would have some, rational basis rather than me just picking a number out of the air.
Right.
Now, getting that information is probably gonna be a little
Right.
more
Yeah, what is that?
difficult.
What does that look like if we were to request something like that? Is that us doing the work? Is that city staff?
I guess you could ask staff to do it. I'd be hesitant to come up with the questions you want to, I would probably suggest that you come up with the questions you want to ask if you're going to be asking the council members what they want, or what they spend per week, so that we're not coloring the
Sure.
process in any way, because it is your process as this body, so.
Okay.
So again, I think the challenge is the timing. Because as I said, when we did this in 2015, we were really up against the deadline. And the varieties of response they ranged from, okay, more work, but I'll answer it because you asked, to, oh, yeah, I remember getting that email. What did you want again? And it's because they're busy.
Yeah, well, and I think of it like, I just did an annual review, like self-evaluation for work, and I think that I had to go through my calendar week by week in reverse to figure out what kind of stuff I had worked on that I needed to know. And I think that if we were to say, hey, council, we're gonna want this information in a year or so, here are the questions we're gonna ask. When we ask it again, it's a reminder, and even if they're not keeping track, they'll go, oh yeah, we should have been keeping track of that. But I think that would help to inform a more realistic, I feel like I would feel more comfortable making a dollar amount commitment if we knew what the hours were. Understanding that it varies from person to person, of course, as with any
Yeah.
job.
Well, if we were just asking one simple question, what's the average number of hours a week or a month put into city council? I'd say a month because the weeks vary.
Sure.
Exactly.
And see if we could get an answer back in a couple of weeks. And it certainly, we'll probably won't get everybody, but if we got at least some, we'd at least have something to start basing a rational judgment on, rather than just, well, what does someone else make, or what sounds like a good number, or whatever.
And I want to say that's really pretty much what we did back then.
Yeah.
Partly experience and partly because, yeah, I mean, the more complicated you make it, the less interest anybody has in answering it. But I want to say that our overall impression was that it was 15-plus hours a week. And that's averaging things out,
Okay.
because you burn up that much time in any given city council meeting week.
Mhm.
But, yeah,
Well, I mean, we could also just take that as a number, at least to start with.
I was trying to see if that number had been gathered by Civ City or something of like what the work was, but.
so that was, as I say, back
That'd
in
be dated,
2015.
yeah.
And I don't think I'm making that up, but,
Okay.
it's a long time ago.
We have 45 days between now and next. So here's the question, if we were to say, city council, give us your average number a month or whatever number of hours that is. If 5 people respond, is that enough information for us to make a decision? If everyone responds, can we make a decision? If no one responds, can we make a decision?
I would say if no one responds, we have less of a basis. But I would say if 5 people respond, there are 11 people on council, 10 if you disregard the mayor, not that I want to, but just saying. I would say that 5 responses, that's pretty representative, I would guess.
And if we are just taking an average of what those are, I mean, say it comes out to 15, okay. That may not be perfectly accurate, but at least it gives us a basis. It's not 5 and it's not 25.
Right.
So how would that help inform our recommendation? So it turns out to be 17 hours per
Well-
week on average. What do we do with that?
I would take that and say, okay, times 50 some weeks a year, how many hours is that? How much should someone be paid per hour for a job like this, if you put it in a,
I see, you kind of come up with an hourly
I would,
average, sort of.
yeah, and certainly we would be guessing at that, but at least, the minimum wage is $9.45 an hour, and, I can tell you what starting wages are in the restaurant industry, which is considerably more than the minimum wage. So we would, I think, then pick a number that we feel like is a reasonable number for the amount for an hourly wage. Multiply, I mean, I just did something, okay, if it's 15 hours a week, it's 780 hours. I just picked $50 as, this is a high-level
Yeah.
leadership. That's $39,000 a year.
Yeah, 15, if you did the, $15 an hour minimum wage, goal at 20, it's 15,000. So like, they're not far off of what is that right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, what does that look like now? Again,
Yeah, it would give us some basis, and at least we could say, and this was our rationalization, our
Yes.
thinking on how we came up with this number.
Yeah, do you
Now-
happen to know, Christopher, what the living wage is for,
that was the 13.
That's 13?
yeah.
For a single person.
The city has its own calculation too, and
Yeah.
12 or
That-
13, somewhere in that range.
12 or 13, you think?
Yeah.
So we're using what multiplier, 17 hours a week?
I did 20, but
You did 20,
yeah,
okay.
so.
And you came up with the living wage via, what was your source, Shoshana?
Washtenaw County's living wage.
Okay.
But yeah, I imagine I know Ann Arbor would be more, and I haven't found that one yet, so.
So at least there's a methodology
Yes.
involved, is what you're
you can-
saying,
You can
yes.
fault our methodology, but at least we had a methodology.
Right,
And
yeah,
so we're not saying, we picked this number because it sounded good,
right,
or we thought it was fair, or.
Yes.
Which we're certainly allowed to do, but it's nice to have, and this is how we came up with
Mm-hmm.
it.
So the current city living wage for the living wage ordinance is
Mhm.
$13.22 if you have health benefits, $14.75 if no benefits.
1475,
okay, so that might be a basis.
so 15 times, I would say 15 times. Okay, I'm doing that.
And that's based on single person, no kid kind of number, so, which we can't.
Well, on the other hand, you know, there are some single people on council, and we might want to have a few others.
And just to be clear, the city's living wage is just, it's not dependent on family size, right? That is just the wage per hour.
Yeah, there's
Per
no,
adult.
there's no indication of that, and I don't honestly know how it's calculated. But
Yeah.
it is adjusted every year, I believe.
I think it's per hour for employee, so it's not
Okay.
taking everything else into account,
Gotcha.
it's just the employee.
Gotcha. I'm also thinking of our accountability to the public. I like the fact that this would be based on on at least an assessment of effort and what seems like a reasonable wage. But I also wonder if the pushback from the public might be, you got these, you know, from the hip averages from 5 council members who may or may not be padding their numbers for whatever reason. It's not really based on fact, it's based on their imagination of, or their sense of what their time is. Is this a fair way to represent compensation for an individual?
Well, I would say that, again, this is my recent exposure to city practices, but when they send out a survey, oftentimes they don't include everybody. They might target, 2,000 people and accept 1,000 response as representative. I would say that if we got responses from 5 city council members, that's 50% of the total. That's a pretty high response rate. And again, it isn't our decision ultimately. If they feel that we've
Yeah,
screwed it up, they can always say, oh, this is not politically fortunate.
right.
But I do have the impression that especially as you say, we march on to a 1-to-3 disparity, there is a sense that maybe it's time to try and narrow the gap just a little bit.
Mhm.
Is there, short of going through the minutes of every single meeting the city's had, is there any kind of tracking of how many meetings each city council rep goes to a year, like official?
That data is not collected in that way. You'd have to put it together, but, I mean, we can certainly give you a list of who's appointed to what. Obviously, different commissions' assignments have vastly different workloads,
Sure.
so.
That would help though, actually.
Because that's an official I mean, because,
Yeah.
you know, they say
Yeah.
typically people under or overestimate X, depending on whatever you're talking about. I think if we had, oh, and that kind of makes sense with this number of commissions, or that seems,
I see. Mhm.
and again, that's just official, it doesn't take into account all of the off-desk work, but,
Mhm.
Yeah, but it is a metric.
yeah.
And, you know, if we're trying to do this in some manner that seems appropriate, there's certainly some data if it's, and we can look at, if we look at what every official commission board that a city council member is on, and how often that board meets, at least we'd have some numbers. I don't know if they'll be useful or not, but it would at least provide one additional metric to go on. if that's not too onerous to come up with.
No, we can certainly get the list, how often they meet. Most of them are monthly, some are every 2 weeks, some are every other month, some are ad hoc. So that's going to be a little tricky, and it may vary depending on the year.
So if you could just note that, of the 20 commissions or boards,
Yeah, 'cause
here's what we know of them. In general, they meet monthly, in general, they meet quarterly, so at least we can see what the metric is for
so the
frequency.
Planning Commission, they have their public meetings, and they also have the work sessions.
Yep,
Parks Commission, all those.
yep.
And yes, by the way, going back to what I said earlier about the city council meetings running until 2 in the morning, to me, those overruns more than compensate for the fact that maybe you occasionally have a 3-hour city council meeting, although I don't know that I've heard of it any recently.
Not recently.
This approach seems to me to get at least as another way of evaluating council compensation. Does this address the disparity between the mayor and council? Or would we be looking at the mayor in this same way from a compensation perspective, or is this strictly a way to look at council compensation?
Well, I think we should get the same information about the mayor as we get about council, and including if we're asking how many hours, ask how many hours puts in. At some point, we're gonna get, we'll have whatever data we have, and we're gonna have to mix it together and say, okay, this seems reasonable based on the data we have. So let's get as much easily collectible data as we can. Recognizing that some meetings last 5 hours and some last half an hour. Well, maybe not half an hour.
So if we have 45 days from today, that's actually a fair amount of time if we ask people if you're able to, I'm assuming you would be the point person, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And we're not asking complicated questions. Asking people to respond within 2 weeks doesn't seem like a bad idea, and then sending out a reminder to those who don't respond the first time around?
Yep. Give me the language you want so that I'm not misstating anything.
So I'm gonna throw a sentence, feel free to edit. Over the course of 1 year, approximately how many hours per month is dedicated to your work on city council?
As a city council
As a city
member.
council member, including meetings, task force, assisting constituents, et cetera. So just one big number. And then is it easier for you if we ask them the question of how many things do you serve on, please list? Or is,
No, I have that information. That's easy enough for me to give.
okay,
And how about as a friendly amendment per week? A month gets a little harder to
yeah.
maybe
Yeah, but
process.
the weeks vary, you
I
have
know they
council
do
meeting
vary.
and- Yeah. I kind of like the how many per month, hours per month, just because there are some meetings that.
Some weeks, are off weeks.
There you
Yeah,
have off weeks, and then you have weeks you're piled up with, and
right.
most of the meetings are monthly or every other week or twice a month,
I
so.
can take it in times 4.
Right, and the council meetings are twice a month, so if there are 5 Mondays in a month, as
Right.
there were in April, you're still only going to meet
Mhm.
twice.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess my preference would
Yeah.
be to keep it as, what's the monthly total of hours?
Sure.
Yeah, as long as, did you have a catch-all kind of at the end that, that wasn't explicitly noted, or, and other related tasks
Yeah.
associated with your work on city council or something like that? And then similarly for the mayor, except we're substituting that language.
Okay.
Is that clear enough?
Yep, and I will re-listen to the recording just to make sure.
Okay.
But I think I've got the gist.
Do we need to be explicit and clarify, like, there are nonprofits that, search for city council people to be on their boards, just as kind of that, I think that's separate. I think that's like the above and beyond. It's
Yeah,
much more
no,
than
I
work
think,
for
yeah,
council.
in your city council duties.
Okay,
I think is appropriate.
Mhm.
okay.
As long as it is clear, and I assume that it is, but the duties extend to things that, as you say, assisting constituents, responding, communicating with constituents, and everybody does it a little bit differently.
Mhm.
But yes, we want to
Yes.
keep out anything that is discretionary with regard to their private activities.
Yes.
Or to political activities. I wonder if we need to be explicit about
Not
that.
including campaigning.
Yeah, or, yeah, attending fundraisers or,
I think saying city council duties.
Yeah.
Duties.
This does not.
Duties.
duties. That is not a duty to attend a
Yeah,
fundraiser.
well, yeah, this does not include campaign-related.
Yes, it would not include campaign
Okay.
Right.
activities.
Do you want me to include that?
Yes.
disclaimer? Okay.
And perhaps we could say, please include any time spent regularly in communicating with your constituents or other city residents.
Yep, I have that.
Okay, good.
Okay, so if we gather that information,
So
And
you're saying
then-
within the next 2 weeks,
Mhm.
if we plan to meet in 3 weeks, that's 21 days, that's splitting the difference with our 45-day.
does that provide enough time
I would say no.
to also, well, and to pull the number of
Oh, all your committee-
task force information?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have that list, because
That
it's all
already
done at
exists.
once in December. They assign all the council
Okay.
members. As far as the boards and commissions that they serve on, yeah, I can speak generally about some of them, but you can also look on the city's boards and commission website.
Okay,
You know, like I say, the meetings vary, but they have all of their scheduled regular meetings are posted, either, I believe they're posted on the web, but they're definitely posted downstairs in the case as well.
right.
So that should be relatively easy to collect, at least for the bulk of them.
Okay, so you're prepared to do that collectively?
yeah, I can do that.
Because as I had said earlier, before the meeting started,
To fill in any gaps that might be,
Yeah.
mine will be sort of a general, here's generally what they
Right.
do, but if you have any questions to fill in any gaps, you could do that yourselves.
so my proposal in terms of timetable would be, send out the email, ask for response within 2 weeks. If you haven't heard from people within 2 weeks, send out a reminder, give them an additional week. So that would take it out to 3 weeks. Then you
Ah.
would want to maybe pull something together, but you would have done most of the pulling together by that time.
So
So
how-
my thought would
yeah.
be,
30
we
days.
meet 4 weeks from today, maybe?
Yeah, that would be the 10th of June, Monday the 10th?
Understanding we gotta see if the other, we're one
Yeah,
person short right now,
somewhere in
right?
that range, I'll do a poll again to make sure, since
Okay.
we're short on
But if that,
folks.
But if we
at
shoot
least
for that.
preliminarily, noon on the 10th,
I would be okay.
and verify
be
that,
okay with
that
that.
works for the 4 of us,
Stand by.
and Christopher for you?
I will make it work.
Okay.
But you'll still do a poll and send out the
Yes.
confirmation, thank you.
Okay, this is good. Thank you, people, for
Is there
thinking
any
this
other,
through.
is there any other data you'd like me to get?
As long as you're asking.
I heard Grand Rapids, I heard Kalamazoo.
Oh, yes, Grand Rapids would be nice to
Grand
to have.
Rapids would be good to know.
Okay.
Kalamazoo, less or so, but would be helpful.
I think Kalamazoo would be, yeah, be helpful.
You might put Midland in there. It's doing fairly well.
Is Midland College Town? I was thinking Mount Pleasant.
No, it's a company town.
Right.
And these, to answer your question, these are current, this information is current unless otherwise noted. There's a
Okay.
few that were left over from the last one, and those are starred. And I believe these comparables were, they were a result of some other, I think it was hiring or no, it was the salary, it was the compensation survey that HR did last year. They identified these cities as comparables for that survey, so that's why they were used. But I can certainly ask about these three.
Ask about South Bend. It's a college town
Oh, yeah.
nearby in the
That's what I
Midwest.
was
Comparable
thinking.
size.
Comparables, I don't know how, but,
For industry, but yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Trying to think of any other good ones in the, Madison's the state capital, so that's a little,
Right,
Columbus is huge.
right.
I don't, the work I don't think needs to be done for this now, but in the future, I'm kind of curious of the annual budgets for some of these cities. And is it just hiding, or is it on here?
So on the second to last page, in the very small font,
Oh, yes.
there's a little bit of that, and I think this is from this might be from the Michigan Municipal League that has some of that. And in fact, yeah, so I didn't collect this, so I'm not sure exactly how to read it, but Kalamazoo is in there.
Which tab is it?
It's tab 7, but it's the
Okay.
second from the last page. It does have the budget revenues and budget expenses in that column there, but if you want, I can ask them to follow up with that question as well. Don't know how much of an answer they'll
Well,
get, but
before we make that work happen, would people find that useful? I mean, on one hand, there's the argument of a smaller budget, sometimes more work.
Yeah, I mean, the only question I have is that budget all their people have
It's
different
very-
put
that's a
different
good
things in
point.
their budget and different things in different funds, and sometimes one city versus another city's budget numbers aren't really comparable.
Okay.
Because depending on, if we knew, if that was clearly the overall, all city expenditures, that could be useful.
well, in some cities, will run a utility or something. That's a whole different
Right, like we have
thing.
water.
It's just not comparable.
Flint doesn't.
Yeah,
So-
that was my concern.
Okay, then don't worry about it.
I would say if it's easily achieved,
I
it
can
can't
ask them.
hurt.
Yeah.
I was actually astounded to find out how big our budget is, and so that does make a difference. It's just, you're right. You're looking at numbers, who knows what they mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Easily attainable. Don't spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, so the HR does this because they're used to doing that, and they send out and they get responses sometimes not, sometimes they follow up. Usually these are not hard questions, but it's just a matter of getting someone to pay attention. So,
Okay.
I also wonder if it would be helpful to pull, I'm assuming out of the city charter, a listing of the duties, the formal duties in the charter for the mayor and for council, just so we can see how inclusive each of those lists are in terms of responsibilities.
Yeah, I have a vague recollection this may have been done at some point in the past, so I'll try to dig that up
Yeah,
Thanks.
if I can quickly.
hopefully it's just in one place and.
No, that's a very good point, and again, I hesitate to use the word limp along, because actually we do very well for a group of people that meet every 2 years. Maybe twice, but this is good information for us to have.
And if you think of anything else, you can just email me, and if it's something that we can do, I can just do it. You don't have to have a full discussion of it here.
Anything else for this agenda item? If not, any communications?
One other point on this, you mentioned that, trying to explain to council, if you want, and this wasn't done last year, but you could include a little explanatory whereas clause or memo when you do this to say, here's why we're raising or proposing a raise, it's to encourage this, that, the other thing. So at least your reasosoning would be there on the record.
I think
for
that
them.
would be important to do.
So
Yeah.
somebody would need to
Yes.
write that.
Really appreciate your
on this body.
volunteering.
Since I'm not the one making the decision, that will not be me, but I'm happy to take a look at it. But just if somebody needed some homework to draft something for next time, you might consider apportioning that in some way.
Would someone be willing to take at least a preliminary cut at that?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Can I email it to everybody, or is there an
Yeah,
open meetings world?
You can email it, but tell you what, why don't you email it to me and I'll forward it to everyone and blind copy everyone, just so that there's no discussion about it.
Okay.
But people can then look at it in advance of the next meeting and bring their comments.
Okay.
And it could just be bullet points, you can do it however
Yeah.
you want if you don't want it to.
So just to clarify, you are saying that is not going to be the preamble for this email, but it might be for future emails?
I was saying, if you end up passing a resolution that recommends an increase,
Ah.
as you're discussing, and you want some rationale there for them
Got
to
it.
chew on, something to include that you would adopt at the time.
And you're saying that could take the form of whereas clauses in the resolution
I
or a
understand.
separate cover memo
Yeah.
that lays out our thinking.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
thank you.
And thanks for Shoshana for
Yes.
taking a cut at that. That'd be
Welcome.
helpful to have.
Okay.
Okay, communications. Any to, nope.
I think we've covered it all.
Anything else? for the good of the order? If not, we stand adjourned. Is it exactly 1 o'clock?
Yes.
Pretty darn close.
Good job.
That-
In case you need, in case you need a motion to adjourn, I
Oh.
move we adjourn.
Yes.
Support.
Support? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.
And thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
Yes.